There we go. And we will also, as we're going through, there is the chat. So feel free to jump on the chat, tell us your tasting notes, a little bit of feedback as well about the whiskies and any questions you've got in general. Jump on there and let us know what questions you have. We've got Anton tonight who's going to be answering all your questions, and he'll let me know if there's any there that I need to look at more thoroughly. Feel free to ask away. So we've got about 39 on here this evening. We are waiting for a few more to come in, but I'm not gonna sit here and let you wait to get started. We're gonna jump straight into it. I do like to have a whiskey quite early on, so we won't wait too much, but we'll get into the nitty gritty bit first. You've got a tasting mat tonight. I did have a tasting mat somewhere. There is an order tonight of we're going to go from Ben Rennie's to Inchgower, then we're going to go Glenallachie to Deanston, then we're going to go Strathmill to Killila. Now, these are pretty heavy whiskies. There's a lot of aroma coming from them. I know this because I filled nearly every single bag that we sent out. And some of them are big sherry bombs. Some of them are quite fruity. And obviously there's a smoky one at the end. I suggest that you try to just pour a couple at a time, so you're that aroma near you isn't getting affected by the other whiskey. If you've already done it, chuck something over the top of them, maybe just to stop those aromas getting to you, because they are pretty big and powerful. We've got the 6 whiskies, got the little juice bags this time. Hopefully everybody received them well. It wasn't like the last time where we had some leakages and some breakages. The bags seem to work really, really well. And we'll probably be sending everything out in those bags from now on. Excellent. Can you describe the order again? Sure, yeah. So again, the order is Ben Rennie's, Inchgower, Glenallachie, Deanston, Strathmill, and then Killila at the end. So the big nice peated one at the end there we're going to have. Going to get started off and chat a little bit, just a small bit to start off with, about Signatory Vintage. Usually if I'm in a room, it would be a show of hands to tell me who'd heard of Signatory Vintage before. But to have a think about Signatory Vintage, they're not that old a brand. They're quite a new brand as far as whiskey distilleries go, or whiskey companies go. They are an independent bottler. What does that mean, an independent bottler? Well, we've kind of got it in the wine industry in Australia, where we bottle other people's wines and the companies create their own version of somebody else's wine. So it's the same in independent bottling. What you're looking for is a representative version of somebody else's product, but you've got more hands-on appeal with that product. So you can decide when you think it's at its best when you independently bottle. And you're not bottling generally for the masses. You're bottling for a much smaller crowd. And so you can generally produce something that's probably of better quality because it's more hands-on. I would say it's better quality anyway. Some people might disagree, but also the age statement on it, etc. You probably get more value for money with this as well. So the concept of Signatory Vintage itself is to bottle one cask at a time. So that's their concept. Okay, so they look at one cask at a time and they decide which ones they're going to go with. Now, through that process of one cask at a time, they need to go and taste a barrel. It's a really hard job, this, I would imagine, for them. They need to go and taste a barrel quite often, right? So in taking out up to 100 mils sometimes to get a taste. Okay, so from a visit to the distillery, my experience of Signatory Vintage and choosing which barrels and how they're coming along is basically this. Spent an afternoon inside the Airdrie distillery, right? We'll talk about Airdrie in a minute and how it interacts with everything and what role it plays. So spend the day in Airdrie distillery, walk into the barrel house and start to taste from barrels. Now, there was a Polish gentleman who would jump about from cask to cask, literally jumping on the barrels, leaping from barrel to barrel, banging it open with a wooden hammer, popping the corks off. Massive big whiskey thief in there to get out the spirit, pouring the spirit into a 100 milliliter bottle, and then throwing it down to the distillery manager. And whilst doing that, also having enough left to put it in a few Glencairn glasses. We're talking April here. So I was given a glass of spirit, and you would smell the spirit and basically try to have a taste of it as well, and kind of get an idea of where this whiskey is going to go in the future. Helping me out was Des McCackerty. So it's such a Scottish name, Des McCackerty. But we'll talk about Des as well later on. But Des is there, and he's shown me how to realise where the barrel's going to go and what's going to happen next, and where he thinks the flavours are going to go. But the problem I had was that the warehouse was that cold that just couldn't smell anything. The liquid coming straight out of those barrels was just so cold that there was no aroma, there was no taste, there was nothing. It was just spirit. It was just warm spirit to me. So what we did was, with the bottles and the glasses, we went outside. We searched for something quite rare in Scotland, which is called the sun. And got outside and tried to find a little sunny spot, and we just laid our glasses in those little sunny spots around about outside the distillery. And as we did this whole thing, we must have had around 12 bottles there, like little glasses sitting around in the sun, and it really needed to warm itself up. Okay, so that was the first thing we needed to do. And at the end of doing it all, we went out and we tried the spirit, or the matured spirit that was from the cask, and it was a much different story once it had warmed up a little bit. So it's always important before we have our first whiskey to just put it in your hand, and I guess as you get to the next whiskey, make sure it's a little not warm, but it's not, it's not cold spirit, because you're not going to get the most out of the spirit this evening. Okay, so but that's basically what they do as a job. They're continually tasting these barrels and figuring out kind of where the spirit's going to go. Now, the one thing from this is that they say angel share in Scotland. The angel share is the evaporation of whiskey from the barrel that they lose every year, that they basically tell the tax office that they've lost. They say it's about, sometimes up to 3%, but I think from that recollection and that experience for me, most of the angel share is actually going down somebody's throat, because they're losing the angel share in 100ml bottles and also glasses of whiskey sitting in the sun. So it might be a little bit skewed to that angel share, but they get away with it every year. And well, apparently one of the best companies in Scotland for getting away with it is Signatory Vintage. So before we go any further, we're going to get into whiskey. So let's pick up the first whiskey tonight. We have a Ben Rennie's. Oh, sorry. I'll just say hello to everybody that's just coming in. Welcome everybody that's just joined us. We're just getting stuck into the first whiskey tonight. We're starting off with the Ben Rennie's, 1996, aged 23 years. So I was just telling everybody, make sure that you kind of get it nice and warm. So like maybe underneath your hand or something, get nice and warm. Lots of aroma out of these ones here. Ben Rennie's distillery. So let's talk about Ben Rennie's first of all. A distillery that not many people know about. Distilleries throughout the history of whiskey usually get known about because of independent bottling. So you wouldn't really know about them if there wasn't an independent bottler out there. And these distilleries end up becoming famous because of independent bottlings, and then suddenly we're looking for them more and more and more. And the one distillery right now that everybody's looking for and everybody sees more of is Ben Rennie's. Okay, Ben Rennie's is a distillery that has had its worst days early on, and it's sort of probably more finding its way in the industry now. And I say that because when the distillery was originally opened, I think it started off, it was back in 1825, it was established. It then got flooded and got basically demolished in a flood. It then changed hands, it got renovated, it then had a fire, it then had to get renovated again. It was then not a modern enough distillery, so it got renovated again. And it's had that progression right throughout its whole life of just this knockdown, rebuild, until what we find is a distillery that's fairly modern now and it's producing like a spirit that is more of a sort of modern day spirit. I guess the spirit from my point of view in this whiskey that we've got here is we talk about sherry bombs all the time, and we all love that sherry bomb. But the Ben Rennies that we've got in front of us is more of a bourbon bomb, I'd say, a fruit bomb. So it's all about these beautiful sort of orchard fruits, and and from the aroma that you've got there, that's basically what I would say was very, very, it was very sort of big and bold, and big, bold, and fruity. That's definitely what it is. So it's certainly a whiskey that has changed, and the reason why I say it's changed is right now this whiskey would be double distilled. So any Ben Rennies, I think prior to 2007, was partially triple distilled. So I would imagine this whiskey that we've got in here had that partial triple distillation. Now, what I mean by partial is that they take a lot of the leftover spirit, not to get too technical here, but they take a lot of the leftover spirit from the stills after distilling, and then do a third distillation on that spirit to get a little bit more out of it, to then put in the barrels to mature. Okay, so instead of just taking a double distillation from a wash still to a spirit still, they then take a little bit of the spirit that's left over at the end of that and just pass that through the stills again and put that through. And what that sort of gives you is a kind of oily whiskey, about a little bit more meatiness in the whiskey. And it basically provides us with this whiskey that really, really picks up. And the legs on it are fantastic. If we sort of tilt our glass and have a look at those legs coming down the glass, beautiful whiskey. So this one here is from what do we say? 1996, and it's 23 years. So it spent 23 years in one barrel, so one ex-bourbon barrel. Okay, so no mucking around. What would happen with a barrel like this is it wouldn't be something that would be in the Signatory Vintage warehouse the whole period of time. So they would purchase this barrel from someone else, a whiskey broker. Signatory Vintage do have like contracts with other distilleries, etc., that they would be given barrels every single year, and they would go and purchase those barrels, and they would bring them back to the distillery, and then they would store them in the distillery where they thought it was most appropriate for that particular spirit and for that barrel. Yeah, so some barrels will be stored in the middle of the distillery, some will be stored on the outsides of the distillery, some will be stored no more than 3 high as it's stored, and it's always dunnage for Signatory. So dunnage being not a concrete floor, but a dirt floor. So the floor is just full of sort of mulchy dirt on the floor. So what you should expect is real natural earthiness from every single whiskey that's matured there. Let's have a taste. So like I said, very much fruity. It's definitely got to be up there, like one of those sort of giving you off those like banana-y flavors. So particularly on the nose, you get banana on the nose. I get banana on the nose. Was it plenty of orchard fruits? So real fruity, and was it like sweet fruitiness to it, almost sugary on the palate, I would have said. Butterscotch, caramel, but I say also a little bit of milk chocolate. So the finish is fresh, so really fresh. I think somebody just quickly said they are mint. Definitely that sort of freshness like it finishes with. It really, really gives a really nice fresh mouthfeel. I really like whiskies that do that, because when you take your next mouthful of whiskey, you tend to get all those flavors again. There's nothing sort of laying on the palate that's overwhelming you on your next drink. It's all about, it's really just sort of freshens your palate up again, and when you go back for another drink, you still get all those beautiful fruity flavors again, and you just keep going back, and it's a really nice whiskey. 50 mils is never enough, is it? So yeah, it's so the Ben Winnie's distillery really is a distillery that it's had its time where it's kept being renovated, but it's sort of holding up now to the modern ways. So it's like huge, like two large big wash stills, and then 4 spirit stills. So it really does push a lot of liquid out every single year, and a lot of independent bottlers now are really pushing to use Ben Winnie's and independent bottlings. Yep. And again, this one being 23 years, it's not often that we see a whiskey of this value kicking around at these sort of prices as well. So great to pick up something that's 23 years old. It sits at 52.6%. That's a natural cask strength. So when it's taken from the barrel, there's no water added. It's not chill filtered. So there's no oils taken out of the whiskey, etc. It's just completely natural from when it left the cask. It goes basically leaves the cask, gets filtered. It gets filtered for it. Take all any char in it or any barrel pieces in it out there. So that's the filtration that actually happens, and then goes straight into the bottling room. The Signatory Vintage, they bottle everything in-house. So everything's done by hand. The bottles come into the distillery at Edredour. There's a bottling hall, and all the staff in there are bottling and labelling and putting things into cases and boxes, etc. And then everything's sent out from the distillery there. So during COVID lockdowns, one of the distilleries we could get whiskey from more often than others was this distillery or this company. For that matter, it's it battled on right the way through. I had to have a very, very small amount of staff on, but kept on battling through to make sure that they tried to provide everybody with whiskey during lockdown, which was terrific. The team there is quite a small team. There's so the Edredour distillery is owned by Signatory Vintage. It sits in the Highlands of Scotland, near the town of Perth. So very, very central. It's just above sort of Glasgow and Edinburgh, maybe sort of a triangular up into Perth. And Edredour Distillery is where all the warehouses for Signatory are found. They also obviously make Edredour whiskey there as well. There's 2 parts of the distillery. So one part is an old farmhouse distillery. The other part is a brand new distillery, which was built quite recently, maybe about 4 to 5 years ago. And these two sit side by side. The warehouses sit right at the back of the distillery. So there are some warehouses that are concrete built, concrete floor, all racking, and they're all for Edredour. So that's how Edredour is matured. But the Signatory ones, all dunnage, all only 3 high. But
waiting room, and someone's got a question about what's a wash still.
Sure. So we've got a question about what's a wash still. So when whiskey's being made, you have generally 2 stills. So when you're making whiskey, you're getting the wort or the sugar from the barley and the mash tun. That would then be pushed onto wash backs. So the wash backs then are where that sugary liquid goes. They get stuck into wash backs, which are generally made out of, like more commonly made out of Oregon pine. The Oregon pine, then that's where the yeast is given to the liquid, and the sugars, etc., and the temperature of the liquid then allow the yeast to form alcohol. The alcohol that's formed in there generally is about 8% alcohol. So what we now need to do is take that wash, which is full of yeast and alcohol, and put it in a still, and the still would then boil up the alcohol, and the vapors from that would rise to the top of the still, and then they'll start to condense when they get to the top of the still, and they'll come down the line arm, and then they'll come out the other end. So that's the wash still. That would generally increase your sort of 8% liquid by maybe about 3 times the alcohol. So it makes the alcohol 3 times more. And then it has to go into the spirit still. So obviously we're using wash to start with, so that's why it's the wash still. And then now it's spirit, we're using a spirit still. Spirit still is generally smaller, okay, because this is how we really create the character whiskey in the spirit still now. And the spirit stills are smaller, and the rapidness of the boiling or the heating of the liquid can vary in the spirit stills now, because it can be really, really lightly boiled and you get nice light vapors, or it can be heavily boiled. Most of the stuff at Edgewood Hour is quite heavy. It's a Highland whiskey, so it's quite vigorously boiled. When you go to the distillery, the wash stills, you would just see all the spirit bubbling around inside and bashing around, etc. in there. And they're really, really trying to get as much vapor off it as possible. So, and also your stills, your wash and your spirit depends on the height of them, the width of them. It's definitely it's definitely the characteristic of your still that makes the whiskey and makes what you're going to get at the end of this. So, so there's wash still and spirit still at the end of it. Hope that answers the question. And then from there, it basically goes into a cask. When it comes at the spirit still, it gets distilled twice. In Ireland, generally it gets distilled 3 times, so we get a higher amount of alcohol. We're up in the 70s when it's finally distilled, whereas in Scotland we're probably in the 60s, around about that. Most whiskies in Scotland now the casks get filled at around 63%, or around about that. Some are different, some get higher. The casks get filled at a higher percentage. The higher the percentage, the more you're going to start to strip away the inside of the barrel. So you're going to start to take wood with you and more interaction with that wood. And you're probably, like, there's some people say that it's not great, the higher the alcohol that hits the cask, it doesn't really mature it as well as a lower alcohol. So most people go around that 63. As you're maturing the cask at Signatory, what will happen is the alcohol will evaporate off the barrel. So you'll lose alcohol, and you'll lose a little bit of water as well. And what happens with that evaporation is that's why this whiskey you're drinking is at 52.4%. It would go in at 63, and the alcohol would come off it naturally. So over 23 years, this whiskey's lost about 10% of alcohol. Okay, we call that the angel's share. So that's where the angels take it and they basically drink our whiskey, which isn't great. So it's basically a position where the distillation process and the maturation process, there's a lot of loss through it, but that loss gets used. So anything that's distilled, a distillation would basically happen when you take the middle of a distillation, really the best parts of the distillation, and the start parts and the end parts generally get used in the next production. Whereas at Ben Rennie's, some of those what's called faints will get used as a triple distillation, just so they can squeeze a little bit more out of that spirit and throw it into the barrel. And like I said, that's where you get a little bit more meatiness to it there with that distillation happening. But Ben Rennie's does not do that anymore. So only double distillation from 2007 onwards. And I think that was just to keep up with the market. It's very complicated having to partially triple distill. I'm not sure if anybody knows which other distillery off the top of your head does that. There's a very famous distillery out there that also triple distills. Anybody come up in the chat can tell us? Bottler, yeah. So there's a bit there, bit more thingy. Auchentoshan is definitely triple distilling. Was it they are a lowland distillery, which triple distill, and you get a really nice light malt there. Hazelburn triple distill, but we're looking for partially triple distill, partially, not triple distilled, just somebody that partially does it. So somebody said Springbank. So Springbank always do a partial triple distillation. So it's about 2.5 times they do for distillation. So it's not a full distillation at that end part, which really again creates the character of Springbank that we all love. So it is something in the industry that's still there, but it's not really something that people want to do anymore. It's quite complicated. It's time consuming. If you're really after a lot of whiskey in your warehouse, you really don't want to do it anymore, because it does get quite complicated and quite time savvy. So what do we think of that one? Hopefully everybody enjoyed that. Again, nice big fruit bomb to start us off. We're probably not going to go into another bourbon barrel whiskey for the rest of the night, really. Everything now is all sherry. And why? Because that's what Edgewood Hour and what Signatory are really famous for, is sherry cask whiskies. Something in the industry that's become really, really rare is finding a sherry barrel now. in a quality sherry barrel that's held sherry for a long period of time, that's going to be able to mature a whiskey nice and slowly throughout the whole process. They're hard to come by, and they're not cheap now. They're extremely expensive, as we've all started to realise when we go out to try and buy a whiskey that's matured in a sherry barrel. So Signatory do this well. The reason why Signatory do this well, Edred Dower, and the history of Edred Dower is that the Edred Dower distillery was sort of owned by the mafia for many, many years. It was owned by the mafia. It had a very, very large relationship with the government in England for many, many years as well, due to this mafia connection. And due to this mafia connection as well, it had a lot of contacts for a lot of the bodegas right around Europe. So what happened then is that there was a lot of contracts written, a lot of relationships built. So they do find that they pick up a lot of really good sherry casks with these relationships still in place. Now, I'm not sure if anybody knows this, but don't want to talk too much about Edred Dower because it is all about Signatory, but the Edred Dower distillery, the whiskey that came from there, when at the end of World War II, when Stalin, Churchill and Truman all met up in Germany, they approached a table together, and Churchill had brought a bottle of whiskey with him. And the bottle of whiskey that he brought with him for them all to drink whilst they were knitting out some peace plans after World War II was a bottle of King's Ransom. And King's Ransom was made at the Edred Dower distillery. So there was a lot of it. There was a lot of King's Ransom kicking around Parliament because of a lot of kickbacks, etc., that were given from this mafia at this time. And this bottle was brought, and they didn't have any whiskey glasses. So Stalin brought along what we would call what would we say? An old-fashioned glass, a tumbler with a thick base bottom on it, and it was round. He had them, and he used to drink vodka from them. So something quite heavy-based, round, not bubbled like we drink from now. Nothing like that. More of a thick base glass. And he brought them along. That's where he drank vodka from. And they put them on the table, and they opened up the King's Ransom Scotch whiskey, and they poured it in. And due to that, everybody started to drink from those types of glasses. So they became whiskey glasses for a while, not because they were better to drink whiskey from or anything, because three of the most powerful men in the world were drinking whiskey from those glasses. So the history of Edred Dower whiskey is obviously set in this peace plan, etc. And it's been through a lot of history, and because of that, again, they have lots of connections and they have lots of ways to collect really good barrels. They also get very good deals, Signatory. So Signatory get a great deals from a lot. They're considered an older independent bottler in the industry, so they get a lot of good deals for barrels. They get a lot of barrels allocated to them, so they're in a really good position in the industry, and they're not really running short of barrels either. Right, we're going to get into the next whiskey, a distillery that we probably never hear of, and to be quite honest, there's not much history. Oh, sorry, a lot of people in again. A lot. Fun. So welcome to anybody that was late in joining us. We're going into the second whiskey, which is the Inchgower 1997, again, aged 23 years. So we're not starting off light here. We're going into really big flavour, robust whiskies to start with. Now, let me just find my one. Again, filling this one up, it was a huge experience that these were really fruity whiskies, like big noses on them. So really worthwhile putting in your glass, warming it up with your hand a little bit, and having a really good nose of these whiskies, because they really are great on getting on. Those aromas are just really beautiful on them. Now, if you do need to, if you find there's a lot of alcohol in your whiskey when you're nosing them, so by nosing a whiskey, it's just sort of hovering over the glass. A lot of whiskey, I guess, geeks, as we would say now in the industry, love to do this, and stick their nose right in the glass and revolve the liquid round about in the glass and get as much alcohol as they can. It's sort of not the way we're ever taught in Scotland to drink whiskey. It's it's quite an elegant spirit. What you would want to do is try and keep the glass as still as possible, and just it's more of a waft over your nose. And you should be able to pick up really, really beautiful fruity notes again from this one. So this whiskey's probably sort of more full of now. Like it's still got orchard fruits there, but because we're maturing this now in sherry, you're starting to pick up on the aromas now, berries. So, and Inchgower is very good at this. Like it's more of a, how would you say, a pastry, like a pie, like a blueberry pie or something like that. It's really, really nice. So it's like it's things that you really can't get from a lot of whiskies, the way they make their whiskey and what's coming from it.
Michael's asked, is it refill sherry?
Yeah, I believe this one's refill sherry here. What was it? What actually happens with this is it's not refill sherry. What happens is it gets matured in bourbon first. Okay, so we're maturing it for the majority of the period in bourbon, but then we take fresh sherry barrels. So a fresh sherry barrel meaning there's low amount of charring on this barrel, low amount of so it's a sherry finish. Yeah, something it's a sherry finish. It's 36 months in a sherry barrel. So, but it's a fresh sherry barrel. So lots of fresh sherry notes in that barrel, really reigniting the whiskey after spending, I guess, 20 years in the same barrel. We're then saying, well, we need something to complement what we've already got. And how we're going to do that? Well, we're going to do it with nice fresh sherry from the barrel and give us some really, sort of fresh sherry notes, which will combine really well with the bourbon notes that are already there. Yeah. So those orchard fruits will come from the bourbon barrel, but the sort of blackberry more sort of side of things will come from that sherry barrel in the nose. What does anybody else get at the moment? Actually, look at the chat. So yeah, so the nose gives off a lot of beautiful flavors, bit of cinnamon there, probably vanilla as well from bourbon maturation. Yeah, with some honey as well, I would say. Yep. There's never a wrong answer, by the way, with this. I mean, it's what your palate has. So it's there's really never a wrong answer. It's you'll see tasting notes being thrown around, and if you go on to somewhere like I don't know if you've heard of it before, called Whiskey Base. Whiskey Base is a huge site in Europe where people go to and they rate whiskies. It pretty much is every whiskey ever released, on there, and there's always a rating on there generally. And when you go on there, the tasting notes on there are completely different from person to person. So it really makes you start to feel, well, I'm not wrong ever if I say something about a whiskey. It's what I smell. My brother-in-law tends to just smell it and say it just smells of alcohol. That's all they can smell is alcohol all the time. But it takes a lot of time to sort of, train your nose to start smelling all the things other than alcohol. And if you just smell alcohol, put a little bit of water in it. Bring down the alcohol a little bit, probably a little bit too strong for your nose or your palate currently. So, yeah, definitely peach and almonds. Yeah, like orchard fruits are definitely there. Apple, peach. I think I said a little bit of pear. The nuttiness as well. Probably more of that sort of pie nuttiness. If somebody bakes a pie and it's got that sort of like slithered almonds in it or something like that. More like that. Yeah. But and let's have a taste. Yeah. So one thing about Inchgower is it's going to give you loads of oil, just huge big whack of oil. It's probably going to sit in your palate as well, like this really long finish in your palate, really oily, really sticks around, really nice whiskey. From the palate, it's something like not something I'm really a big fan of in whiskey, but it's got these really rye notes to it. Like it's a rye whiskey, this whiskey. So and I always relate rye notes to sort of that capsicum flavor that you get when you eat capsicum. So that's what I sort of get from it. Was it the just let somebody else in? Was it and again, but it's got a lot of vanilla there. So for me, yeah, it's got those capsicum or rye notes, but those vanilla notes really balance really well with it. So those are probably the two main notes in there for me. But on the finish, I'm sort of getting coffee beans. So I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of coffee on here as well. And then the best thing I like about this whiskey is as it's sitting on my palate in the background, it's just completely, I think somebody else said at the start there, popcorn. Yeah, this is where I get the popcorn. I get salted popcorn and salted butter, toffee apples, but salted toffee apples. Like my mouth just feels like it's got this beautiful saltiness on it, but it's sweet as well. So it's sweet and salty. And what wins this for me with this whiskey is the finish. I just love the finish on it. It's something you could just sit on all night because those flavors at the finish really, you just want them to keep lasting. It's not a whiskey that says, oh, I need to go for another drink because I need to smell it again or I need to taste that palate again. Now the finish is just really settling on my palate really nicely. But I'm not sure if anybody else gets that, but certainly what I get from the whiskey. Like I said, Inchgour Distillery, it was probably built in, it's about 1870s it was built. It's really, it was really built to replace an old distillery. And the old distillery that sat on the site was sort of a distillery that wasn't ever used anymore. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it was Tochaneel, I think it was called. And it was basically a distillery disrepair and wanted to sort of build something new. This distillery is owned by Diageo, so it's obviously used in Diageo blends out there. That's one of the main reasons. And obviously, if it's used for a Diageo blend, it's obviously something that they're putting in, you would think, to either something like Johnnie Walker. So it's 2 million litres a year it produces. So in those 2 million litres, we don't really see much Inchgour out there. So it's not really in the marketplace at all, other than independent bottling. So it means there's a lot of liquid from that 2 million litres a year going into blends out there. And they're flavouring all the world's favourite blends. So these are really required for in the industry. Again, not got much history behind the distillery, but it's probably, again, one of the whiskies that's probably more sort of used for is Bell's as well. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Bell's whiskey. I'm not sure you get as much Bell's in Australia, but yeah, Bell's whiskey is certainly something that Inchgour is used in as well. Yeah. Inchgour Distillery has 2 wash stills and 2 spirit stills. So they're basically taking large wash stills and then into smaller spirit stills, but only got 2 of each. So big production, but obviously has to be open often because there's not a lot of stills there. Yeah, but yeah, great distillery, really good distillery to explore, and independent bottling. And I think the more natural you can taste Inchgour, the better. So if it's fully matured in bourbon or fully matured in sherry, you usually get a terrific whiskey. Where they've finished this one off, but I think they've done it really well. It's also not something Signatory would generally do, is finish a whiskey. It's a very new thing. So that, yeah. Somebody's saying there, Bell's is probably not in Australia anymore, but used to be in Australia. But Bell's whiskey is huge in the UK. It's a huge blended brand, and I would imagine the size of Bell's is probably in the US as well, and and many other countries. But we just don't see it here as a blended whiskey. It's certainly a blended whiskey that's on that sort of cheap side of the market. Probably down at your cost of a Johnnie Walker Red, Bell's, but mostly just sort of bourbon barrel matured. So yeah, it's good. But yeah, very good whiskey. So let's try to knit together now how Signatory Vintage came together. We've got a guy called Andrew Symington who worked in a hotel, who was kind of into his whiskey. He was a hotel manager. He had tasted a bit of whiskey. He would go out to bars and taste whiskey. And he would buy whiskey. And Andrew decided that that's what Andrew wanted to do, was create something that was a bit more of a sort of talking point in the industry. So he said he wanted to create an independent bottling, but when the cask was signed off, he wanted the independent bottling to be signed off by somebody famous, and then promote the whiskey based on somebody who's famous. So, and that famous person would bring into the name Signatory Vintage. So it was a vintage whiskey. It was all about the year of the whiskey and the age of the whiskey, and then have somebody famous who was signing that whiskey off as a signatory of that whiskey. He ended up choosing a cask of Glenlivet. I think the cask of Glenlivet was like from the 1960s. And bearing in mind this was in 1988, and he decided to buy this 1960s cask of Glenlivet. He bottled it at Cask Strength. It's a fully matured sherry Glenlivet. And he basically got it to the point where he needed it bottled, he needed everything done. And before he even kind of got anybody famous to sign it off or do anything with it, it sold out. So he pre-sold it and it just all sold out. And he thought, well, why am I bothering finding somebody famous? Let's just get this out. So off it went. It had no signatory. He kept the name. And from that, he just kept bottling casks that he went and he found at distilleries and he picked up at whiskey brokers. And from there, this hotel manager decided that it was time to quit his job and do this full time. And as he did this and the money sort of started to build up, Andrew decided that what he was going to do is he needed somewhere to store his whiskey. So, and not only store it, but he wanted to have a bit of a dab hand in making whiskey as well. So the option to buy Andrew Distillery came up. It was a farmhouse distillery in the Highlands of Scotland, and it was owned by Pernod Ricard. Now, Pernod owned Glenlivet at the time, so obviously a huge company, but they had no need for Andrew anymore. It's a farmhouse distillery. It didn't really produce much whiskey. It was a very small output. So they sold this distillery to Andrew Symington. So he was thrilled to get a distillery on his hands. Something, I don't know if you've looked up Andrew before, but it's basically a farmhouse. White buildings, white painted buildings, red doors, old farm rooms in there, and it hasn't changed really today. The main part of the distillery is still a farmhouse distillery. The room where they distill whiskey in, again, is just it's tiny. The stills are tiny as well, and they produce a very, very small amount of spirit every single year. But he wanted to be part of the industry, so Andrew got himself in the industry not only through independent bottling as Signatory Vintage, but he also said that he's now in there as a distillery manager and owner, and from that point he had to learn how to make whiskey. Let's jump into the next whiskey. This one's quite exciting, actually. I think that the next whiskey is something that it's not a whiskey that is on anybody's radar, really, Glenallachie. But before we have this, I want to tell you that this year, every year we have a world whiskey winner. Somebody who wins World Whiskey of the Year in the major awards, and Glenallachie won it this year for one of their whiskies that they produce every single year. Now, you can't get it anymore other than going to auction sites because it was a batch of whiskey that they did. But Glenallachie's always produced really, really good spirit. It's been a great distillery, and it's a distillery that nobody ever has known anything about, really, because it's never really been on anybody's radar. We've not spoken about it. But, it's a distillery that will offer us so much great spirit. And even more so now that the distillery manager there, a gentleman called Billy Walker, is very famous in the industry for, I guess, taking old distilleries that have not really been producing all that much and have not been in the public eye, and turning them into superstars. And I would say that because he turned I don't know if you've heard of it before, but Ben Riach distillery, he turned Ben Riach around and made Ben Riach a powerhouse in it. He turned Glenglassie around, which is just a phenomenal distillery. They started it all up again and made sure that the spirit there that was being produced was great spirit. And but then one of the most famous ones now is Glendronach. So Glendronach distillery is now one of the powerhouse sherry cask whiskies of the world. And he then sold them off to one of the largest spirit companies on the planet. So he basically, one of the largest spirits companies on the planet came along and said, we want to buy this. And they purchased all three distilleries at once. And they were happily, Billy and the rest of the crew that owned it, were happy to take the money, but they wanted to do something with it. They knew that they could do something with it. And what did they do? They went and bought Glenlivet distillery. The one thing that Billy was very famous for when he bought a distillery was if there's a letter in the name after the Glen, yeah, Glenlivet would be a capital G, and then Glenlivet would all be lowercase. Billy likes to change the first letter after Glen to a capital A. So it's now Glen Alicky, right? So it's you really pronounce the A in it. And it's the same with Ben Riech. It was just Ben Riech, and he's changed it to Ben Riech. So it was a real, and you really say it and you really remember it. And the same with Glendronach. So it's Glendronach is one word, but he changed the D to a capital D. So you're really pronouncing them, and it really stood out there in the industry what he did. And he's done the same with Glenalicky. He's produced this, but the spirit that we're about to taste is not Billy Walker's spirit. It's older spirit that was produced at the distillery prior to Billy Walker's arrival, and probably sold to Signatory Vintage before Billy Walker's arrival, which was only a few years back. I think maybe about five or so years ago. Now, maturation on this one here. We're taking this one here and we're putting it from day one in a first fill sherry barrel. Okay, the first fill sherry barrel was filled at around 68%, so a higher alcohol volume at 68%, which is why we're currently sitting at 62.9% for this whiskey after 12 years. So it's not that lower than what a barrel would usually be filled at. So a barrel generally filled at 63%. This one's 62.9. So again, if you're not used to the alcohol content, feel free to add water. But yeah, let's have a nose of this one here. So the one thing good about with the Signatory Vintage bottlings is when you look at the front of the label on these here, well, you can't see it because of the light. They're very transparent. They tell you absolutely everything what happened to this. So we can tell everything from this bottling. It was a Glenlivet. It was bottled and it was distilled in 2008. It was aged for 12 years. It was distilled on the 6th of May, 2008, and it was bottled on the 13th of January, 2021. So we know when it was bottled. It was matured in a first fill sherry butt, so a larger sherry barrel, not a small bourbon barrel, a larger barrel. And there was only 626 bottles of this produced for the whole world. That's all you can possibly get of this. And then some of that was sent to Australia. So just shows you how small scale bottling one cask of whiskey can be. And this whiskey may not have made it to some corners of the world. It may only have made it sometimes just here. Sometimes we would take the whole cask because we've tasted it and we've thought it was good.
Just when you say we,
yep.
Jesse asked earlier, you say we a lot when referring to Signatory. Is that just your fellow Scots, or do you have a particularly close connection or history with Signatory?
So I'll drop in the story a little bit later of the relationship we have with Signatory, but I say we because we are actually the ones that bring it to the country. So we pick barrels, we get samples, we decide which ones we want. We don't bring anything in that we don't think is suitable to the Australian market. So that's why I say we've got a really good close connection with Signatory, and I'll talk about that in a little bit of where the connection came from and why we've now got a really good connection with them. But yeah, definitely it's a huge connection. One of our #1 distilleries that we have an association with at the Whisky Company, definitely, yeah. So, so this one here's got like lots of, from my point of view, dark fruits. So that's what a first fill sherry barrel will generally give you. I guess Christmas cake would make me think of dark fruits straight away. It would also make me think of things that are spicy, a little bit spicy as well. But on this one, the nose on it, really big dark fruits on here, like more that plum, stewed fig, things like that that are in there. But I think this one's quite sweet as well. So it's more of a sort of caramelized brown sugar way of the nose. And then on the nose as well, I get a little bit of sort of a spice. So whether it's like a gingery spice on there as well. It's like a gingerbread man spice when you smell a gingerbread man. Yeah. It is actually really good to add water to this one. It will bring it out. Those is like Christmas Day. That's right. Yep, definitely. I think so. Yeah, it's it's talking to me about those raisins that are in a Christmas pudding. It's talking to me about spices that are in there, that cinnamons, etc. And I would imagine that the palate would go that way. Okay, but we'll see. So let's have a taste and see if the palate goes up. So really warming in the palate. So the first thing I get is warming. The alcohol percentage on this is extremely high. You probably get more in your palate from adding a few drops of water to it. It'll probably bring out more for you, and it'll probably match up the nose and the palate a little better. And it's okay to add water to whiskey. It's what whiskey's all about, is experimenting with how you actually drink this, at what you like it at. Again, on this palate, I think again we go to more that berryness. There's berries in there, obviously coming from these sherry casks, but there's loads of spice, and there's like toasted walnut in there as well. So like this real prominent, for me, a real walnutty but toasted walnut flavor. But again, loads of raisins, loads of cinnamon, loads of Christmas cake. It is just like a Christmas cake in a glass for me. Yeah. And I guess the finish for me now is more, you're probably again saying spice. The ginger's coming back from the front of the palate, from the nose, sorry, and it's sweet. It's toffee sweet. I think that's really all I'm getting, is this like toffee and ginger on the finish again. Definitely plum pudding, I would say. Yeah. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it as well, because I think it will change quite dramatically with a good bit of water in it.
Did you want to drop that?
Just using my finger.
Nature's dropper.
We do sell water droppers at the whiskey company, but if all else fails, use your finger. Put a few drops of water in.
You've always told us use your fingers, a great motto. Definitely. They call adding water in Scotland, adding water to your whiskey, it's called releasing the serpent, because they believe that there's so much oil in whiskey that when you add water to it, that releases those oils. It splits them. It breaks them open. It's almost like oil in the road, and then when it rains, you can smell the oil in the air, because it's sort of broken that oil up, and you can smell the oil more. That's generally what water does to whiskey. It breaks open all those oils, and if it's a really oily whiskey, you'll get more aroma, but it will gentle the palate down though. So yeah, so you got to watch. But yeah, like John said, takes water really, really well. Definitely from the word go, I think from the nose, this is a whiskey that you'd want to add water to. I'm not sure if anybody knows this, but there are guys in the industry who, like Bill Lumsden for one, who's the master distiller at Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. He basically adds half water to his whiskey all the time. So whatever he has in the glass, he'll add half again of water, because he feels that that's where you get the most amount of flavour from, is adding a lot of water to it. It becomes a drink other than an alcoholic drink. But then he's probably tasting a lot of whiskey in a day, so adding a lot of water would be very good for him. So with the water, I think it's opened it up. I think the blueberry is now sort of that blueberry pancakes are definitely now with water in it. The palate's just, I think now the palate's more pleasing than the nose on this whiskey when you add water to it. And then when you finish off, I think it's like milky hot chocolate, like a milk chocolate, hot chocolate, which is great. It's really changed the finish on it as well, and it really leaves it sitting in your palate a little bit longer as well. Yeah, definitely. Now, interestingly enough, Glenallachie Distillery sits at the bottom of Ben Rinnie's, and not Ben Rinnie's distillery. In Scotland, we call a mountain a ben if it's over a certain amount of feet, and that's where this distillery sits at the bottom of a mountain, or a mountain that's called Ben Rinnie's. So you'd think it would be Ben Rinnie's that sat at the bottom of that mountain, but not so. So it's obviously the area is quite prominent for these distilleries, and there's a lot of distilleries in this area. We talk about Glenlivet. So you've got the Glenlivet, which is a distillery, is the Glenlivet, but Glenlivet is an actual glen with like 9 distilleries in it. So you'll see a lot of these distilleries saying Lamb, Tom and Till, Glenlivet. Well, because they're in the Glen of Livet, so they're allowed to call themselves Glenlivet. So basically, they use that name a lot, and some people come away from it because they don't want to be associated as Glenlivet. Maybe they don't think their whiskey's good enough anymore, but it's certainly happening more now that people are separating themselves from them. But yeah, finished really, really nice on this one. Really, really opens up. Really like it with water. I think definitely a whiskey that needs the water on it, but still a really, really nice spirit on there. The one thing Signatory are looking to do when they bottle their whiskies or they taste their whiskies as they mature is they make sure that they don't lose the actual distillery character. It's the one thing they don't want to. They don't want to overpower it with sherry. They don't want to overpower it with the barrel. They want to complement the barrel to the spirit. So that's when they know it's ready. If they feel like the spirit's being taken over by the barrel, they'll generally say, well, let's bottle it or let's do something else with it because we don't want it. We don't want to lose it. So it's very important. I think for independent bottlers, it's extremely important to do that. It's probably important as well that every now and again an independent bottler brings out a whiskey that's just big punchy sherry, because we all love that, you know. But in general, they're all trying to complement, and particularly Signatory is trying to complement the spirit that was there. Yeah, really. Going to move on to whiskey number 4. So as we're talking about that, we'll talk more about the relationship my company and myself have with Signatory. The company that we own for now 8 years is called Nippy Sweetie Holdings. We originally started out as Nippy Sweetie Whiskies, and then changed the name to the whiskey company about 3 years in. And when we did that, we felt that we wanted to take on brands from Scotland and import them. And at that moment, I was a huge fan of Signatory. And at that moment, independent bottlings weren't brought into Australia, really. There was a couple, but not that many. Brands that are really well known now and probably started to come in when we were importing were things like Adelphi. There's also Cadenhead, and there's Gordon and MacPhail. So these are probably the main guys in the industry. You know, like they've been around for a while now, and they're doing some great things. Adelphi's probably the younger one of the lot, but they've just done some great stuff. So, you know, they're a really good one to follow. But we thought we'd bring in Signatory, so we had to contact them first of all. And basically, they've basically said at the start, not interested. We don't know who you are. We're not interested at all. So I kept emailing, and I was really getting a lot of negativity back, etc., where they weren't interested in doing anything with us. And my wife, Catherine, who's also a director in the company now for 8 years, she decided that she was going to start to do something. She was going to get in contact with some distilleries, and again went back to Signatory Vintage and asked them whether we could import their stuff. And immediately after the first email, built a relationship with them. So obviously my emails weren't good enough, and you know, she started to get a little bit more response. And due to that response, we set up a meeting with them. We flew over to Scotland on a family holiday, visiting relatives, and decided to go and visit Signatory Vintage. When I got there, I was completely ignored for the whole meeting, for the whole time I was there. They only wanted to deal with Catherine. So, and Catherine basically told the distillery manager there what they wanted and what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. And we sort of came away after a tour of the distillery and the Signatory Vintage warehouses, came away with this, I guess, more hope that something would happen, but nothing really in writing and nothing really solid that something would happen. We got back home to Australia, and we followed up. Well, Catherine followed up, and as she followed up, we heard nothing back for around 3 to 4 months. And after 3 or 4 months, we received an email that said, "This is what's available. Pick what you want, and you'll need to pay it up front." So we decided to bring our first lot of Signatory Vintage into the country. Based on this, we just chose what we thought, and we brought it in. At that time, I think we brought in, and some of you on here would remember, we brought in a 20-year-old or 23-year-old Glenlivet, first fill sherry. We brought in a 20-year-old Lafroig. These were whiskies that would cost you around about $200 a bottle at that time. And they went pretty well. They didn't go quickly at the start because nobody knew about them, but they started to go very quickly, and then they ran out. And then after they ran out, we had hundreds of people looking for them because a lot of people were online talking about them. So we decided to go for more and more, and 2 years went by of doing that. And the relationship went from, here's a list, to, do you want some samples? Do you want, what else can we do for you? There was lots of trips back and forward, and then there was also trips to the distillery just to spend the day with them at the distillery. So it became a really good relationship, and we started to import Edredour as well into the country. Very small amounts because they don't have a lot, but certainly Signatory, huge amounts coming in now. We import from Signatory around $500,000 Australian dollars worth of Signatory every year at the moment. Sorry, 1.5 million, not $500,000. 1.5 million of Signatory every single year comes into Australia now, and gets distributed around some bottle shops, but mainly the whiskey company use it, and it's also used in a lot of bars as well. So becoming very, very popular now in the industry. So really good relationship with them. I'll progress on a little bit more of that relationship and what we've done with them in a minute. Deanston Distillery. So we're popping to Deanston now. The one thing we found from this bottling of Deanston, now it's been repeated a few times now, this Deanston, but it's extremely high ABV. Again, might do with some water, but I wouldn't put water in at the start because we weren't sure of it. We weren't a big fan of it to start with, and the first sort of batch of this that came out a few years back, it was quite sulphury. There was a lot of sulphur on it. And when you smell it, it was like a sort of freshly struck match. And that's usually, in the industry, it's not really something that people go for, was these big sulphury whiskies. But so we were unsure. We went then to New Zealand, to a whiskey show in New Zealand, and they had it. So they basically had the Deanston there, and it was one of the most popular whiskies at this show. So many people were very interested in it because it stood out, so we kept going with it, and we said, oh, let's get more of it in because it seems to be very popular, and it has been. It sells out extremely quickly. I think by the nose on this one here, though, it's not as sulphury as the previous versions of it, but it's certainly still got lots of sherry and lots of alcohol to it as well. Now, Deanston Distillery is owned by Distell Group. Distell Group also own Bunnahabhain Distillery on Islay, and they own Tobermory Distillery. So hopefully you've heard of them before. But Distell Group basically they're a huge South African company. Okay, and they're I guess they're after sort of the big guy, like they're one of the big guys in the industry. And a lot of whiskey from Bunnahabhain, Tobermory, and Deanston goes into places like Dan Murphy or Vintage Cellars and a lot of corporate groups right around the world. But it's good to be able to find this in independent bottling, because you don't see it as much. You don't see it out with what it is that often from the distillery. So it's really, really good to be able to taste this on cask strength as well as just in one cask. So this time, again, it's one first fill sherry butt. So for the whole time, the whole 13 years, it just stays in one sherry butt for that amount of time. Okay. So having a nose on it, again, you're gonna get dark fruits here. So again, probably more in that. I think somebody said sticky toffee pudding or it's something like that again that I would get on the nose here. But it's got this beautiful fruitiness to it on the nose. It's actually like from any whiskies that I have, it's one of these ones that you'd sit on the nose for a while. Yeah, so lots of those sweet, creamy notes, honey, bit more of a honeycomb because you're thinking creamy, and so it's still sweet honey, but creamy honey. what was it? But I also think it's still got a bit of ginger in there. So same as the last one. Deanston itself used to be a cotton mill. So, and the distillery was built within the cotton mill. Most of the whiskey distilleries in Scotland only started in 1825 because you were only legally allowed to produce whiskey from 1825. So a lot of people say we were established in 1825, whereas Deanston was probably established way before that. You know, so it was probably in the 1700s. It was probably had whiskey being made there, but it would have only been registered more sort of later on. What was it? And more so that Deanston was known as a distillery, as like an active distillery, not until 1965. So it probably produced a fair bit of whiskey that wasn't really legitimately being made for quite a long time. So again, modern distillery now, thinking something that pushes out quite modern spirit, and it's something that is still evolving. They're still really how do you say, experimenting with their spirit in different casks and, you know, finding where it fits. Really. Let's have a taste of this one. Straight away, there's sweetness. Like, it really coats the mouth. But again, it's a lot of those toffee notes, you know. So, and somebody's just said dangerously smooth for 63.9%. Who would think that was 63.9%? It is like, there's no burn on it. There's the finish on it's not catching your throat at all. It's beautifully and sugary. Yeah, a few people like it there. Terry's loving it. It's yeah, it's like, and it's sweet. It's got this like berryness to it as well. So loads of these like strawberries, raspberries, like summer berries to it. Always remember, I worked in kitchens years ago and we made summer pudding. Things like bread soaked in juice from berries, summer berries, and then it was filled with berries. This reminds me of that on the palate, like a big fruity number. You know, and then the finish probably like now more like Snickers bars, I guess, like peanutty and chocolatey peanutty thing for me. I probably get a bit of citrus on there. I'm not sure what that is, but yeah, and certainly a bit of white pepper. It has got a spice, but it's pleasant. It's definitely pleasant. After having a taste of it, I'm not sure I would add water to it unless it was harsh. Like, if you felt it was harsh in any way, add water to it. But if it's not harsh, I wouldn't go anywhere with this at all. I think it's just perfect the way it's been bottled. You know, I mean, these should be perfect the way they're bottled because Signatory's bottling them when they think that they're at their best. But like one drop never hurts, they say, particularly in a cask strength whiskey. You can hurt something at 46, 48%, definitely by one drop, but certainly something at 63.9, I wouldn't have thought so. But let's add a bit of water just to see how it changed, because it may even open it up a little bit more. But it may dilute it too much. No, try it. Yeah, I think so. I think it's opened up. I think on the nose, it's opened up the sweetness again. It sort of gives you like this more of a layer to the sweetness, but the taste.
It's a lovely long finish on it. So
Yeah.
Really warm.
I think it's actually, yeah, it's made it more drinkable. I think like it's easier again on the palate, but I think it's taken away the flavour on this very, very quickly. Even one drop of water. So, you know, it's diluted it. You can taste that dilution, but it's certainly, again, much easier on the palate. Yeah, definitely. I probably wouldn't. Yeah, definitely. Sherry flavours are coming out a bit more now. Yeah. It's always that's the other thing. It's always good to let somebody else add water first, and then you sit there with the actual original whiskey in your glass, knowing fine well that you shouldn't have done it. Yeah. But we're hoping to obviously see more from Deanston. There are a company in Australia who have fought really hard for all the consumers in Australia and basically said, well, we don't see enough Deanston, we don't see enough Bunnahabhain, and we don't see enough Tobermory. And they're going to start to bring in all the stuff that we don't see to the country. So, which is great. So an importer that's sort of battled hard with the still to say, we don't want the everyday stuff. We don't want the 10s, the 12s, etc., the 40-year-olds. We're not interested in the age statement. We're interested in cool and happening. So we're going to see more Deanston coming into Australia. But like we always see lots of beautiful Deanston casks coming in as from an independent bottler, and I've never had a bad one now from Signatory, from Deanston. They seem to be picking some great casks from them, which was fantastic. But we'll continue to make sure that nothing bad comes in at all. Sorry, that's definitely our job. I think so far on that, I think for the night, it's probably up there with one of my favourite now for the night, just that because it's just sticking around so much. So yeah, very nice, very nice whiskey. So basically, when we formed this relationship with Signatory, we were able to now go to the Signatory warehouses at Edredar Distillery and have a bit of a play, as I said, have somebody jump about the barrels, no sense of OH&S at all, and take some samples from the barrels. We picked some single casks for Australia. We've now picked 4 of them. So we've got 4 single casks that we brought out in Australia. We've got a few more to come. We've picked a few more barrels that are sitting there maturing, and hopefully get them bottled later this year. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but the Whisky Company actually has a 6-monthly competition for all of our customers. If you buy something from our website, after 6 months, we take everybody that's bought something, and then we randomly put you in some sort of random calculator, and it will randomly pick someone out, and you get 6 samples sent to you, and you have the job of picking one of the 6 samples, and that sample, that whatever you chose that from that barrel, the whole barrel will get bottled with your name on it. So we all know who you were if it was terrible. Yeah. So, but you'll get a whole barrel. So if it's 290 bottles, every single one of those bottles will say exclusively bottled by the Whisky Company, a bottle exclusively picked by, and then your name on it. So we'll go to one lucky winner every 6 months. So whoever this next 6 months gets picked in December, we'll probably get a few signatories that we're looking to bottle. So it'll be quite exciting as well. So obviously, the more you buy, the more chance you've got of winning that competition. So we've been to Edredar Distillery and looked at Signatory Vintage's warehouses, and it's really given us a great look into the industry, because there are some Laphroaigs there that have been maturing at Signatory's warehouse for a good number of years now, say 20 years. And these Laphroaigs don't need the sea. They don't need the ocean crashing against the wall. They don't need the sea air, which they tell you. They are, Laphroaig is Laphroaig, and we don't think it needs that warehouse. I mean, a lot of Laphroaig is actually matured in the middle of Glasgow, where there's car fumes and factory fumes and all that sort of thing sitting around. And it just gives you a little bit more in depth of, it's the environment that where it's looked after, and it's just going to bring out all the aromas and all the flavors that they're producing. And the Dunnage warehouse sort of, it does do something to it, because it gives it that sort of moist oakiness to it. And really, I think the flavor penetrates a little bit more. But in general, there's so many casks sitting in there. And we say to anybody, if we're allowed to travel again and you get to Scotland, give us a bell and we'll set you up a tour there. Like, it's so easy to get a tour there. You just need to make sure that, give us a little bit of time to get a tour guide for you, but more than happy to get you through the Signatory Vintage warehouses, get you tasting stuff from there, and also have a look around the Edredar Distillery. They're more than happy to have you there. And it's a great team there. They've just recently closed down the visitors centre at Edredar, so there's no more visitors centre there if you go to Scotland at the moment. And the reason for that was it was just too hard to navigate through all the lockdowns. So hopefully we see it opening up in the future again, because it's a great distillery to visit. But those Signatory Vintage warehouses are usually off the tour. You don't get to see them at all. But you can walk in there and basically find 1960s Glen Grants and the 70s Port Ellens, and there's just everything in there that you can go and you can taste them. So definitely, because obviously Angel's share is present quite badly at Signatory Vintage's warehouses. So yeah, get in there and have a shot of that if you can get back over there. Like I said, the distillery, the Edred Hour distillery, was they basically created another distillery, and this was about 5 years ago, where the farmhouse distillery wasn't enough for them. They weren't producing enough. So they decided to build a replica distillery at the other side of the stream that passes through the distillery. This was off the tables because the architect came back, and the architect basically said, well, why are you building a replica of this? You're just going to get this other small distillery. It's not going to be a working distillery. It's sort of, again, one of these, cool places to visit. You need to build something basically industrial. And they said, well, we don't have the space to use it. We don't have the land. And they actually turned around to Andrew Symington and said to Andrew, well, when you purchased the Edred Hour distillery, you actually purchased all this land behind it. And in that land that was behind it, there was a farm, there was a beautiful field, which they grew barley in, and also a large area, like a forestry area, and there was a little clear area. And he said, you actually bought all that with it. I'm not sure if you know that. It wasn't on the original plans. And he said, so he was astonished by this. And he turned around and said, well, let's build the distillery back there. So the new distillery is basically an industrial distillery. It's a big, basic concrete house with, lots of racking for Edred Hour to produce, and an area to expand as well. So, and he's been really excited by that because he's become this small guy that was just a hotel manager, and basically been able to bring out an independent bottling, buy a distillery, and now expand the distillery into something more commercial just by doing it himself. Andrew himself is a master of the quaich. And I don't know if anybody's heard about master, like the keeper of the quaich, but if you're in the industry for a certain amount of time and you do a lot of stuff in the industry, and that's not drink whiskey. So you can't just drink whiskey. You gotta change the industry and do something in the industry that's basically different, and you dedicate your life to the industry. You get to become a keeper of the quaich. You'll be nominated by other keeper of the quaichs or master of the quaichs to be a keeper. And it means that you are part of an elite club which meet up and drink whiskey, very good whiskey, and talk about the industry, and basically have a little bit more influence on your distillery and how you see the industry going and what should happen. Andrew became a keeper of the quaich, and then not before long that Andrew is now a master of the quaich. So he chooses who comes into this prestigious whiskey club. He's been that for a while now. The other gentleman at the distillery who runs the distillery, Des McCackerty. Des is the guy that we deal with continually, and Des is also a master of the quaich as well. So we've got two guys who are master of the quaichs working at this distillery, and they do a great job, and they do a great job of keeping Signatory's casks and bottlings up to date, and purchasing new, and even throughout COVID they've managed to keep on buying really good casks and keep on top of the casks that they've got there. So it's a great job they're both doing there. Now let's go on to Strathmill, second last whiskey. Strathmill Distillery. It's basically, again, we're in Speyside, owned by Diageo. Strathmill was, again, from its name, an old mill. So this one here means shallow valley, Strath. So it sits in, obviously, this little valley. It pumps out about 2 million litres of whiskey every single year. But really, the history of this distillery isn't really well known. We don't talk about Strathmill much. There's not much Strathmill that comes into Australia. We don't see a lot of it at all. But the stuff that they produce is really, it's great spirit. And the funny thing about this one is that we've had this here for a while. We were gonna do a big launch last year of it, and we're sort of waiting for a time when we're going to do it. And we wanted to do it in front of people, but it never eventuated. And but you know, so we've decided to just launch it with this import that's just came in recently. When we were pouring this out, the first thing that we could think of the smell of it, which is quite interesting, is the smell of coffee and Coca-Cola. So go figure. Probably not for a lot of people a very pleasant smell. Like, you might not like Coca-Cola, but that's how it smelled to us. It was this beautiful sugary, you know, aroma, and it had this little this creamy espresso-ness to it. But we haven't actually had this in the glass yet. We left this to tonight to actually taste for the first time. So the only person that's actually tasted this whiskey and told us to buy it is my wife. So she's we can thank her for this. But 13 years old, and it's a sherry cask finish. But this was put into refill sherry butts, and it sat in refill sherry butts for about 12 years. And then, just to freshen it up, it was put into fresh sherry butts for about 8 months. So it's just been given this ignition of sherry again. Like I said, when we were putting it into the bags, it smelled delicious. So I'm really interested in having a taste of it. So again, I think it's like old-fashioned Coca-Cola. I'm not sure why. I do, however, get a lot of fresh malt here, so it's quite malty. But again, those blueberries are back again. Those berries are there in the nose. Cola bottle lollies. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what. Syrup. Yeah, yeah. Cola syrup. Yeah. Maybe because I've said it. That's why you're getting it. Yeah. Yeah. David said Flora and Fauna, Strathmill. Yeah, I mean, Flora and Fauna have done some good stuff, and some Strathmills that come out of there are fantastic. Yeah, like definitely blueberry jam, like jam, berry jam, beautiful. Yeah, may as well have a taste now. So really oily. One thing from Strathmill you'll find is oily spirit. Nice big bold oils in there. I think as far as like a distillery goes, they tend to produce that a lot. Is this oiliness on the spirit, but it's got a lot of spice to it. It's almost like it's just full of like cinnamon, nutmeg. You know, like that's what I get, this massive big oiliness, massive big spiciness, and probably lots of nuttiness to it as well. I'm not sure, like there's a lot of dark fruits there for me, and the finish is just dark chocolate. So from my point of view, it's quite floral as well. So and the good thing about this is that it's been refill sherry for most of its life, and it's been a fresh sherry butt for 8 months. But that's Strathmill spirit. You can just taste Strathmill spirit in there. It's just not ruined the spirit at all. It's just basically said we're going to turn Strathmill spirit into something that's got a bit of sherry acknowledgement to it, and a bit of those herbs and spices from the sherry. You know, so it's not a big sherry bomb. But going back to it, I think I've got more. I'm getting more coffee now, I think, going back to it. Definitely. Yeah. If you ever, I don't know if anybody's seen any bottlings, but of Glenlivet bottlings. Glenlivet used to be Strathmill, so they got rid of Glenlivet distillery, and then they tore it down and they built Strathmill in its place. So it's but it's like the Glenlivet is quite an old name in the industry.
It's done well.
So from my point of view, very different sherry whiskey, definitely very different. And from my point of view, it's more that Coca-Cola, coffee, nuttiness behind it than dark fruits, sweetness on this one. But, yeah, but some of these actually said honey on the palate, which it's probably about honey sweetness there as well. There is a bit of sweetness, but yeah.
But it's more like a treacly sort of.
I just kind of get dark chocolate at the end now. All I'm tasting is dark chocolate. Really good dark chocolate just sitting on the palate.
The cola goes all the way through from.
Yeah, I think so. Very different whiskey. This one sits at 61.2, so it certainly again doesn't drink. Oh, I don't think it drinks at that point. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it now. If you've got any left, just going to see what that does to it. Does anything to open it up a bit? Definitely opens up the nose. My goodness, jeez, it opens up the nose incredibly. It's more herbal now. It's so Strathmill now. This like garden herbs on the nose when you add water to it. And it's gotten rid of the cola completely. There was no cola there at all.
Darren said, "Don't add the water." David said, "No, I've just got menthol now."
Menthol, yeah. So change the nose completely. Palate. Yeah, and again, it's watered down that palate to the point where my preference is not adding water, because the palate now feels like it's this diluted drink. You can really taste the difference, like the separation between the water and the whiskey in it, I think, on the palate. And it's really kind of gotten rid of the finish when you add the water to it. Yeah. Yeah, good. So only 706 bottles of this produced for worldwide. This was produced from cask number 6 from the Strathmill distillery. So quite a low number of cask there. Casks now around the world that are sherry based, a lot of them are just being filled with sherry just to give them a seasoning. Not really fully matured sherries in there. It's a lot of people are now asking for casks that, they just need so many sherry casks now that it's more just pumping in as much sherry in there as possible. So, but yeah, it's some of the casks are given some good quality and some not so good quality, and some are very, very different. So I think this is very, very different what this is giving off, this cask. That's good. Good to have. So funny thing about COVID for us is that we have this import coming in. So just obviously came in about a month ago, and we ordered this in January. So it's taken a good 8 months to get here. So 8 months to get bottled, 8 months to get on a ship, and then 8 months to get here, that full process. We also ordered in May. Funny enough, May's delivery is due in 3 weeks. So it's a very short period. And in May, there are 122 different bottlings of Signatory on its way. So we have a huge import of that coming in as well. So lots and lots and lots of Signatory will be about coming up to Christmas. We do have a 10%, is it 10% off tonight? Yeah. So 10% off tonight if you want to purchase any of these whiskies. They have been doing pretty well so far. So it's they are basically they're basically selling out very quickly. Particularly ones like Deanston, which have been popular in the past, and Glenlivet because of the name it's had. But what somebody said, all 122 coming up on the website, or only some of them? All 122 we should see on the website. From 43%, 46% in cask strength, but mostly cask strength. There are going to be some 30th anniversary bottles coming back that we originally had, and we've managed to steal more of them from the distillery. Some of those 30th anniversaries that were out maybe 2.5 years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we've asked for them, and a few that they kept back, they've decided to give us for Australia. Yeah, there'll be a really nice Glenlivet 20-year-old first fill sherry, so a repeat of one that we had when we first brought in Signatory. So yeah, we've picked some good casks. There'll be some exclusive to the whiskey company, but also some that we'll be sharing with other retailers as well. So you'll see them in other retailers as well, some of them. But nothing. Pretty much all the ones that are coming in will be on our site. We've got a lot of hard work coming up ahead of us to put them all on there, which we're looking forward to. And what we're going to do, though, I think, because we've got a lot of them, is we're probably going to do another tasting like this, but we're going to do it over the space of 3 weeks. So we're going to do 6, 6, and then 6 every Wednesday night. So if you want to get involved, as soon as they come in, we will let you know all about them, and we will get it all set up for you. Because we really want to taste as many of them as possible. And probably what we'll do is we'll do a 43% night, a 46% night, and a cask strength night. So you get to taste sort of that right across the board there. And we may still be in lockdown in October. So
what else are you going to do?
it's a good way to spend your evening. Are there any Islas coming? Yep, there's some Islas coming as well. We have a few on there. We've actually stuck a blended whiskey on called Hogshead the other night. It's a blend of Bowmore and Lagavulin, but also got a lot of grain in it as well as a blend. And it's all been done in sherry barrel. So it's an item that goes into the American market. It's big and bold, smoky whiskey. You know, almost that smouldering smoke. You know, like quite intense smoke in there, but. We brought that in. We only brought 12 bottles of it in, so whatever's on there is just 12 bottles. But there's more of that coming as a blend. But yeah, some of those distilleries that we didn't see, we saw in the past, will come back again. But certainly not at the prices that we saw them at. No Macallan will be coming in. Unfortunately, we find that Macallan's too overpriced now, so it's just becoming very, very difficult to price with the whole transport to Australia. Something that we've watched is, and I'll probably go more into this in the question time, but we'll be looking at how the removal of duty will affect the pricing on whiskey in Australia. So I'm happy to talk about that at the end. But certainly some nice bottlings coming in. And what we might do is, everybody that's been on this, we might do a list tomorrow. We'll send out the link for the video for this, and we'll send you what's coming in. So we'll send you a little updated thing of, we won't have any pricing yet, or age. We never get to know the age of these things, but we only get to know the year they were bottled. And it's not until they get here we find out the age of them. But generally, we've tasted most of them. So it's that was a hard job a few months ago, tasting 122 whiskies. So if anybody wants to get involved in that as well, we're more than happy to get you involved in tasting some of these whiskies as well. More than happy to do it. Certainly, it's a big job for us now and again. So there's a huge import coming in, which will be very, very exciting. We'll go on to the last whiskey. Funny thing about this whiskey though is that we were starting to get bored with this distillery. We see it all the time. It's everybody's independently bottling it. There's also actual bottlings that come out and like from the distillery, and I think a lot of them sort of lack a bit, but some of them are really, really good. We felt that these were great bottlings. We've had a bottling just recently, a first fill sherry barrel Caligula 9-year-old, which has been in stock with us for a while now. We could have sent that one to you, but we decided on the new one that's just came in. So this is a Caligula from Iowa, aged 10-year-old, a 2010 vintage. And this has been done in a refill sherry, but we had opportunity to get first fill sherry whiskey from Caligula, but I think that this worked better. Definitely just thought that it was a better approach to any whiskey is refill, make sure we get the distillery flavour in there, and we're really, really talking about the smokiness of the whiskey. So this Caligula here, matured 10 years. in a refill sherry vat. There was only 638 of these available, and it's at 58.2%. Now I'm not a whiskey drinker in regards to peat. I don't really enjoy peated whiskies all that much. I can have a glass of them, but I love this one. So it's really changed. I think if you can just give me this really nice, balanced whiskey that's got peat in it, I'll do that. But what's the ppm? I actually don't know the ppm. I mean, Kalila are about 35 ppm. So I guess it would be that. They don't disclose it really. The parts, the ppm when you refer to a peated whiskey is phenol parts per million. So yeah, phenol parts per million is the peatiness of it. Now, the world's peatiest whiskies up in the 300 mark ppm, but most ppms are like 50 and under. Most distilleries produce. Lag Distillery, which Aaron have built over the past few years, they're producing a peated whiskey at around 50 to 60 ppm. We should start to see samples of that coming into the country next year. So we're really looking forward to that as well. But Kalila, I mean, probably producing the most amount of whiskey of any Islay distillery at the moment. It's owned by Diageo, so they use it to put into Johnny Walker, mainly like the blue and the double black, etc. It's got 3 massive wash stills, 3 massive spirit stills. It's automated, the place, so really one person runs the distillery at any one time. It's all push button stuff. Everything does whatever it needs to do, from sucking the barley out of the truck to storing it, to milling it, to mashing it, to fermenting, to distillation, etc. All done by computer. I mean, they've got it right. I mean, it's a good way to make whiskey. They've generally got it right. They produce a wonderful spirit which mixes with lots of different grain whiskey and is great as a single malt. So the name Kalila comes from Sound of Islay. So it sits basically on the shoreline between there and Jura, Kalila. A beautiful part where the ferry comes in. If you ever go to Islay, or ever get to go to Islay, it's got a beautiful view of Jura, and you can't see the Jura distillery because it's around the other side. But it's a tremendous distillery to go to. Very industrial looking, but where it is, you get some great views. And if you go into the gift shop, it'll be like somebody's died, but it's one of those distilleries. It just does what it does. And even the Islay Festival, it doesn't really do much. There's not as much activity from that distillery, but it just keeps producing consistent good whiskey. 6.5 million litres of it a year it produces, which is huge. So yeah, it's a dull distillery, very dull, but it's all about the liquid that comes out of it. But yeah. So this one here, I guess on the nose, it's I can get those fruits on it, but there are a little bit of fruits, and I think it more comes from like a berry again. It's more berried fruits from the sherry butt, like strawberries or raspberries coming from it. However, the reason why I like this, because I don't smell lots of smoke here. I think of like chili chocolate. So like dark chocolate with chili in it. I think that's what this smells like. I get this huge big burst of like red chili on it, and I really like that. I think I love that smell of chili chocolate. It's got this heat to it, but chocolatey. It does have dark fruit. Yeah, it does have dark. I'm not sure which dark fruit on the nose. Yeah, cherry. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Prunes, dates, something like that. But predominantly for me, it's the chocolate and the chili. It's not smoke driven on the nose, but So the taste of it. Again, when I tasted this, it was salty. It was like chocolatey. It's more like salted chocolate now. I still get chocolate. I think the chocolate through it's beautiful. It's such a great transition from the nose to the palate. It's salty now. It's got the dark fruits in there. They're just a mixture of lots of different dark fruits, and it's got this sort of a little bit mineralistic to it as well in there. So, and I thought it's great. It's not about the smoke here. It's about using that creamy Kalila spirit with smoke in it, and transforming that to something that's got smoke but also got something else. The finish then just goes completely salty, earthy. Again, goes to berries, cherries, and I thought this was great.
Yeah, salted caramel is a good call.
Yeah, salted caramel, and it just sits in your palate continually. Like, you could just sit here for a good 5-10 minutes, and it would just stay in your mouth. That salted caramel, so that saltiness is just filling your palate. A
couple of the usual suspects are asking if we're getting a 43 and a 46 and a cask strength night.
Yeah.
Will there be a strictly peated tasting night in the future?
We could do that. We could do peated night. I wouldn't like to take it. I'd be very biased. It was maybe Anton might take it. We'll probably do something that we'll get it in, and I think what we'll do is we'll really, really think hard about maybe even have we could even opt out of the 43, 46 and cask strength and just have 3 cask strength nights, one night sherry, one night bourbon, and one night peat. I think that sounds a little better, Let's but there's room for 43 and 46% whiskies. Certainly room for it. You can get a cask strength whiskey and add water to it and give you a 46% whiskey. But yeah, there's a lot we could do with this. There's a lot of whiskey coming in, and it will take us a good couple of weeks to process it all. And I'm not sure if anybody realizes that when whiskey comes into Australia, let's just check and see if this is actually on the back of here. When whiskey comes into Australia, it comes in without so it has the front label on it, but we have to individually label every single bottle to Australian standard with this little stupid label in the back here. So that's weeks worth of work when you bring in a 40-foot container full of Signatory, and each bottle is individually numbered on this. So this is bottle number 546 of 638, and the tin also is the same number on it. So you got to make sure that the tin always matches up with the bottle. So when you're labeling it, you got to take it out of the tin, you got to label it, put it back in the exact same tin, or you as the customer is not going to get the right product. So it can take a while.
Damien also just asked, what about a regional-based tasting?
Regional-based tasting, so
just purely Speyside.
Speyside Island. We need to do 6 of them.
And the bottle.
For Ben Nevis lovers out there with Signatory or independent bottling, there's not a lot of Ben Nevis casks about at the moment. The reason why is that the distillery at Ben Nevis is going through a few changes in regards to not so much ownership, but more distillery manager ownership. So the distillery manager's changed, and he's sort of getting on top of casks that are available. The distillery has actually decided now that they have to get on top of core range first before they get on top of independent bottlings. But we should be looking at this time next year, you'll start to see more Ben Nevis independent bottlings go back into the market. We do have 6 Ben Nevis casks sitting there at the moment maturing, which we're probably going to bottle during next year. They're all sitting around 19 to 23 years and all sitting in sherry. So we should see them next year as well. So keep an eye out. We'll keep you updated on them. We're trying to get them bottled at the moment. So and they are our casks. So they will be probably bottled by Signatory Vintage. That's most likely what we'll do, is get them transferred from Ben Nevis to Signatory, get them bottled, and then get them to Australia for everybody to enjoy. I'm not sure I would add water to this. I don't think it's worthwhile. I think it would just dilute it. So very good. We enjoy that. So I mean, Signatory is in a position where it keeps on growing. The warehouses are growing. They're buying more and more casks. They just celebrated their 30th birthday a couple of years back. So been around 30 years. I think the next thing is about, what does the distillery look like without Andrew about? He's not there as much now. So what's it going to look like after that? And we certainly don't want somebody else coming in, like a corporate coming in or anything, to change this. But yeah, it should be very, very good. Like we should start to understand more about what the future of Edred Dower looks like and what Signatory looks like over the next couple of years. So somebody said about, have you tried your Ben Nevis samples? Yes. So we tried them a year ago and they were ready a year ago, but we're just we've kept them because like we couldn't get them bottled. Nobody was willing to go and pick them up and do anything with them. So we're pretty sure that it'll be okay for the next 2 to 3 years. Slow maturation in Scotland, not like Australia. But yeah, very, very good. Really good barrels, all different, all completely different, all being stored in different parts of the warehouse. Some racked, some not, some dunnage, etc. Did that on purpose. One that's been in a bourbon barrel for 15 years and then it's been transferred to sherry. So all completely different. We're not going to see the same thing come in. And we're definitely not going to see something that's coming in that's like mediocre. Like they've all been very well looked after. We've always had a very good relationship here with Colin Ross, who was at Ben Nevis Distillery since 1989. I'm not sure if any of you saw, but Colin passed away in April, and Colin basically had been at the distillery. So what we know of Ben Nevis now, he basically produced like such a great guy, gentleman, but as well as distiller. And everything that's came out of Ben Nevis really that we've seen, since 1989 has been him. He's had his paws all over it. And he created his own independent bottling called Roslin Distillers. Roslin was the name of his house. So when he bought his house, it was called Roslin. And so they thought Roslin Distillers. Him and his son put all the marketing together, all the casks they bought together, all the bottles, etc. They did everything together. And now his son's taken it on, so this will be that. And but we just had such a good relationship with him to be able to get these casks from the distillery and for him to look after them for us. So we're very keen on getting them out of there now that Colin's no longer around anymore there. So we know they've been very well looked after.
So what people got dropped out, they're trying to get back in.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what we'll do is hand over to some questions. If you want to jump in the chat, there is currently about 50 people on, so hard to sort of maybe have you ask me a question. You might want to put it in the chat for now. We'll go a few questions, and then what we'll do is we'll close the tasting off, and then we'll open it up for people to stay on, and if you want to have a drink with us and ask some more questions. Yeah. So happy to answer anything, but certainly the position we're in with Signatory is still getting some good bottles in. They are going up in price though. In regards to duty, I think I said we'll see duty in Australia drop off from the UK. We won't pay any duty anymore. Duty consists of a very small percentage of what we pay. So 5% of your bottle is duty. So you get duty free at the airport. It's 5% discount basically. The duty payment is in comparison to the shipping payment. So 2 years ago, we were paying about $1 a bottle, maybe 80 cents a bottle to ship from the UK to here. We're currently experiencing shipping fees of $4.30 a bottle now. That's how much the shipping has gone up. And then the time delay as well. So the time delay is big to us because we pay for a lot of whiskey and then we have to get it here as quickly as possible. And if we don't get it here, there's obviously costs for us. And imagine any other importer. We ordered stuff in January. I think something was supposed to be here within 6 weeks. Sorry, 8 weeks it was, and it took 3.5 months to get it here. So it is chaos shipping out there. So there's that.
Couple of questions dropped in. Yeah. You mentioned Bunnahabhain before. Why is it so premiumized with new bottlings?
Bunnahabhain, I don't like. I think it produces a lot of spirit, and again, I don't think Distell have got a clear vision of what they're doing. So like you struggle to see 18-year-old Bunnahabhain, we struggle to see 25-year-old, particularly in Australia. So I just wonder whether that's the byproduct of selling off casks, or I'm not sure. I think that's what it could be. Like, it's just basically bulk production and then getting money in as quickly as possible, selling these casks off to independent bottlers, pretty much the same as Kahlua. I mean, the question always bears on independent bottling is why don't Diageo have their own independent bottler? I mean, why haven't they created something that's their own? I mean, there's surely a way. They haven't done it, so why not? So they're more than happy to just say, there's independent bottlers out there, let's sell it off to them and get some money in the door. And we can because independent bottling is part of the industry. It always will be. And there's a lot of independent bottling around like that. I mean, I guess the question I ask you as a consumer, and I'm very interested in at the moment, I see a lot of independent bottlings come out, is you can possibly buy something from Signatory that's 23 years old and it's $400 or $300, for example. But there are also independent bottlings of the same distillery, of the same year, of the same age, coming out with other independent bottlings, and they're $800 a bottle. Why? Why is that different? Why is that so different in price? The casks, we know that the casks aren't any different. We know that they are basically, like, Des McCacherty at Signatory goes and picks up Ben Rinnie's casks, and he sees the auction sites and he says, well, we bought that barrel for, let's say, $6,000 or pounds. It was that somebody else bought one at £12,000. It must be very different to our barrel. And then when they're picked up, or they're being told that these barrels that were double the price are just sitting right next to their barrels. They're not even in a different part of the warehouse, but yet they're twice the price. So it's more, and somebody said it's marketing. It is, yeah. So they're marketing to you, and then do you drink it and then say, I spent $800, that's better than the $400 bottle that I bought, because I spent $800 on it, or it has a better label on it, or it's in a better bottle, or or it's marketed to me on a tasting better than something else. I'm not sure. I'm posing the question to you because these guys have been doing it for a while, and it's and again, it's not about the age, because a lot of these bottlings that are coming out are the same age. They're just double the price. So it's just quite interesting part of the industry right now, is independent bottling. There's a lot out there, and most of it's scarce. There's such a small amount. I mean, I recently purchased an independent bottling, which I've not done anything with. We've just been very busy, but I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it's a Superheroes collection. I don't know if anybody's seen it on Market Talk. So Superheroes collection, there was a Superman, there was a Joker, there was a Flash, and I think Batman's coming out at the end of this year, so it will complete the 4 series. And they were purchased for around €120. They're now 700-800 euros, and not 708 euros on auction sites. They're 700 to 800 euros on the same websites that were originally selling them. So it's just it just shows you, it's just like, because they're getting scarce now, everybody wants to have them, and it changes quite fast. So yeah, quite an interesting industry. I'm gonna finish the tasting up there. Thank you very much for everybody taking part. You're welcome to stick around. If you do have any more questions, more than happy to have you sticking around and ask more. I hope you enjoyed the tasting tonight. We will be working on interim tasting to get us through to the Signatory one. We'll release that in the next week, and we'll send an email out to everybody to let you know what's happening, and then we'll push on to the Signatory one again after that. We'll decide what we're going to do. If you've got any options you want us to come up with, peated night, etc., for Signatory, just email inquiries, and we'll look at them, and we'll certainly put something together. But thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the whiskies tonight. There is a 10% off. When's the 10% off going till?
Going till the end of tomorrow.
End of tomorrow is the 10% off if you want to purchase any of these Signatory Vintage whiskies. Yeah, they're all available at the moment. But thank you very much for tuning in. Hope it was informative, and I've kept you all engaged. It's my first online tasting that I've done for over a year and a half. So
You did very well.
thank you. Great. But like I said, welcome to stick around. But I'll be turning the recording off now.